For years, people have assumed medieval armor was heavy, outdated, and easily beaten by modern protection. But when you look at how it was actually built, and what it was designed to survive, a very different picture appears. Medieval armor wasn't primitive at all. It was a fully engineered defensive system shaped by real combat, real soldiers, and real battlefield needs. And in many situations, it performed better, lasted longer, and protected more effectively than much of the gear used today. Number 1. Why armor was built for real warfare, not theory. When people compare medieval armor to modern protective gear, they usually imagine something rigid, clumsy, and outdated. But that picture has almost nothing to do with what real English knights and soldiers actually wore. Medieval armor didn't grow out of theory or laboratory testing. It came from generations of practical experience, hard lessons learned in brutal close-quarters combat, where a soldier's life depended on every rivet, plate, and strap. A man-at-arms in 14th or 15th century England didn't put on armor for ceremonial reasons. He wore it because failure meant death within seconds. Knights marched through mud, crossed rivers, stormed castles, and pushed through packed battle lines while fully armored. They trained with it for years, until it became as natural as everyday clothing. That constant use shaped armor into something far more advanced than most people realize today. English warfare of the Middle Ages wasn't fought at long distances. You weren't hiding behind drones or vehicles. You were fighting within arm's reach of enemies swinging swords, axes, maces, pole axes, and spears, all weapons relying on raw human power. These weapons didn't hit once and stop. They slammed into armor again and again with the intention of crushing bones or punching through vulnerable points. For armor to survive this, it had to be far stronger than most modern audiences imagine. Medieval armorers understood this reality intimately. They didn't create gear meant for a single type of threat like today's vests that mostly focus on bullets or specific fragments. Medieval armor faced everything at once: downward spear thrusts, sideways axe cuts, stabbing daggers, heavy hammer blows, grappling, and constant body-to-body pressure from packed infantry. Yet, despite this extreme violence, armor still had to remain mobile. A knight who couldn't move quickly was a dead knight. That's why real battlefield armor weighed around 45 to 55 pounds, spread across the entire body, not concentrated on the shoulders like many modern vests. This made it remarkably comfortable for long periods. Soldiers could run, climb, mount a horse, crouch, and wrestle without much restriction. Historical sources repeatedly describe armored men moving with surprising speed, and modern reenactments prove it is absolutely possible. Another major advantage medieval armor had was longevity. Modern plates often fail after one major impact and must be replaced, but medieval armor held up through whole campaigns. A dented breastplate could be hammered out. A damaged strap could be replaced in camp. Armor was built not only for protection, but for continuous service in harsh conditions. And since each suit was custom fitted, it worked with the wearer's body rather than against it. Modern gear often forces the body to adapt to the equipment. Medieval armor was crafted to fit the human form naturally. The effectiveness of medieval armor becomes clear when we look at how warfare functioned. Knights dominated European battlefields for centuries for a reason. Their armor made them nearly invulnerable to most battlefield weapons when properly used. Swords were mostly useless against a good breastplate. Long-range threats like arrows were dangerous only at certain angles or ranges. Soldiers wearing armor often walked away from combat with bruises instead of fatal wounds. Armor allowed them to stay in the fight longer, endure more hits, and outlast less protected enemies. It wasn't a ceremonial costume or a myth. It was a proven survival tool, refined by generations of warriors who had no margin for error. Number 2. The smart engineering behind layers and materials. The deeper you look into medieval armor construction, the more clear it becomes that medieval craftsmen had a remarkable understanding of materials. Long before metallurgy was formalized as a science, they tested steel not with machines, but with their lives. Every improvement came from real combat feedback. What broke, what bent, what shattered, and what saved a soldier's life. One of the most important innovations was the shaping of armor plates. Medieval armor wasn't flat like many modern replicas. It was curved, fluted, and angled to redirect force. Curves helped deflect arrows and thrusts, making even strong blows glance off rather than penetrate. Against the English longbow, the medieval superweapon armorers responded not by making armor thicker in a crude way, but by perfecting steel composition and shaping techniques. Hardened, tempered steel breastplates with strategic curvature often performed far better than movies suggest. Underneath the plates, soldiers wore a gambeson, a thick padded jacket made of layers of linen or wool. Modern viewers often underestimate the gambeson, but historical testing consistently shows it absorbed shock extremely well. A heavy sword blow might be stopped almost entirely by padding alone. Combined with plate armor, it worked like a modern multi-layered protection system. The padding dispersed energy, the plate deflected and stopped penetration, and the maillet joints caught any blade that got too close. Mail rings protected flexible areas: the armpits, inner elbows, groin, and neck. These zones needed movement, and solid steel would have restricted mobility. Mail filled the gap perfectly. While it didn't stop everything, it prevented deep cuts and protected arteries, buying time for a knight to respond in combat. In modern times, protective gear is usually specialized. You have ballistic plates for bullets, stab-resistant plates for knives, and padding for blunt impacts. Very rarely does one system handle all three well. Medieval armor did exactly that. It resisted cutting, stabbing, piercing, and crushing in one unified design. That versatility comes from the way layers interacted. Armorers also understood heat treatment. They quenched steel to harden the exterior and temper it to prevent brittleness. This happens to mirror modern metallurgical techniques, even though medieval smiths learned it through experience rather than chemical theory. Some armor pieces even show signs of differential hardening, where the edges are harder than the center, an advanced concept still used in bladesmithing today. The brilliance of medieval engineering appears most clearly in how armor adapted to different battlefield challenges. Heavy cavalry needed reinforced breastplates. Infantry fighting in tight ranks needed solid helmets and strong shoulder defenses. Archery-heavy conflicts demanded thicker front plates and better visors. Smiths tailored armor not only to individuals, but to the realities of specific battles and regions. English armor, in particular, was shaped by the long history of Anglo-French conflicts, the rise of longbow warfare, and the bitter internal battles of the Wars of the Roses. What makes medieval armor truly impressive is that it was never just metal protection. It was a complete, intelligently designed defensive system, layered, adaptive, ergonomic, and built with a deep understanding of human movement and battlefield physics. When you see how well these pieces work together, it becomes clear that medieval warriors weren't wearing outdated steel shells. They were wearing some of the most intelligently crafted personal protection ever created. Number 3. Real combat proved what worked and what didn't. Modern protective gear is tested with controlled experiments, ballistic gel, standardized firing distances, laboratory measurements. Medieval armor was tested in a far harsher environment. Chaotic, unpredictable combat, where nothing behaved the same twice. Every battle, every skirmish, and every duel served as a live demonstration of what armor could handle. Knights didn't rely on theoretical data. They relied on survival. Historical records show that soldiers understood how armor behaved under different attacks. Chroniclers described arrows bouncing off plate, swords sliding harmlessly along curved breastplates, and poleaxes used specifically to target weak spots like joints or the sides of helmets. These sources match archaeological evidence. Skeletons from Towton, the largest and one of the most brutal battles on English soil, show injuries, mainly in exposed areas such as the face and the underside of the skull. Attackers rarely bothered striking the torso because they knew the armor was too strong. This alone reveals how well medieval armor performed. When an enemy intentionally avoids certain targets, it means those targets are effectively protected. Armor-shaped strategy. Modern body armor, in contrast, often doesn't change enemy behavior because bullets ignore most surfaces and go straight through whatever isn't protected by plates. Because armor performed so reliably, medieval fighters developed entirely new combat styles. Knights learned half-swording techniques, gripping the blade with a gloved hand to drive the point into precise gaps. Poleaxe fighters aimed at the joints, trying to compromise mobility instead of brute-forcing penetration. Billmen hooked knights off horses because striking them head-on was pointless. These techniques would never have evolved unless armor made normal strikes ineffective. Each failure, each success, and each adaptation went straight back to the armorers. Improvements were made quickly because battlefield data was immediate and brutally honest. If a helmet cracked under a poleaxe strike, smiths reinforced that area. That's how the English sallet developed its rounded sides to protect soldiers from crushing blows that had proven deadly. If mail links tore too easily, the smith changed the weaving pattern or metal quality. Medieval craftsmen were not guessing. They were responding to real-world evidence more directly than most modern engineers ever do. Armor wasn't designed for show. It wasn't ornamental. It had to withstand mud, rain, heat, cold, and constant movement. Soldiers spent hours fighting shoulder to shoulder, pushed from all sides, slammed against by enemies, horses, and fallen bodies. Yet armor remained one of the most dependable pieces of equipment a warrior carried. Modern protective gear often fails outside ideal conditions. Plates degrade in heat, moisture reduces material strength, and blunt force trauma still causes severe injuries even when penetration doesn't happen. In contrast, medieval armor was built to be slammed, dented, scraped, and battered repeatedly and still function. This is why comparing medieval armor to modern protective vests misses the point. Medieval armor wasn't meant to stop bullets. It was meant to stop the full spectrum of violent human-driven attacks. And in that role, it performed exceptionally well, so well that it shaped entire fighting traditions, determined tactics, and allowed heavily armored soldiers to dominate European warfare for centuries. Number 4. Mobility and endurance were built into every piece. A lot of people today picture medieval armor as a stiff metal shell that locked the wearer into a robotic stance. But historical reenactors, curators, and combat researchers have repeatedly shown that properly made armor behaved more like a flexible exoskeleton than a cage. English knights didn't just slip into armor for special events. They lived in it during long campaigns. They trained from their youth to fight, ride, run, and wrestle while armored. By adulthood, the equipment wasn't something they noticed consciously. It functioned like a natural extension of the body. The trick was in how weight was distributed. Modern vests load weight onto the shoulders, causing fatigue very quickly. Medieval armor spread weight across the hips, back, and thighs. The result was better endurance and less muscle strain. This is why knights could march for miles, climb castle ladders, mount horses from the ground, and even break into sprints wearing full gear. It wasn't superhuman strength. It was smart engineering. Armorers understood biomechanics intuitively because they watched their clients train. They constantly refined how plates overlapped, how straps pulled tension, and how joints rotated. Take the elbow and knee articulation. Many people assume medieval joints were stiff, but surviving armors show brilliant craftsmanship. Plates overlapped like the segments of an insect, giving rotational freedom while maintaining protection. An armored soldier could raise his arms high, swing overhead, kneel to stabilize a spear, or twist his torso while tackling an opponent. None of these motions were restricted. What was restricted was reckless movement. Armor forced fighters to stay grounded and use proper technique, which actually reduced injuries. Another major point is the difference between battlefield armor and jousting armor. Most museum pieces that tourists see are tournament suits. These were designed for controlled, high-impact events where knights charged each other with heavy lances. Jousting armor was extremely thick and intentionally restrictive for safety. It was never meant for real combat. But because those suits survived in large numbers, people mistakenly assume all armor was that bulky. Real English war armor was lighter, slimmer, and more mobile because you needed full mobility to survive in chaotic melee conditions. Medieval campaigns also tested endurance beyond combat. Soldiers marched in heavy rain, slept in cold encampments, and navigated muddy terrain. Their armor had to handle all of this without needing constant maintenance. The joints resisted rust. padding absorbed sweat and softened friction. Straps were designed for quick adjustment. Knights didn't remove armor during quick breaks or minor marches. The process took too long. Instead, they loosened straps, rested, and kept moving. When comparing this to modern protective equipment, the difference becomes even clearer. Riot police struggle with mobility because their shields, padding, and helmets lack integration. Soldiers wearing modern plates often remove them during long movements because the weight placement causes back and shoulder strain. Meanwhile, medieval knights rarely discarded armor because doing so meant vulnerability to sudden ambushes and missile attacks. Modern helmets, especially those with ballistic visors or night vision mounts, significantly reduce peripheral vision. But a medieval visor could be opened or flipped, and an open-faced helmet offered an almost completely natural field of view. Even closed helmets had cleverly angled slits and flares that preserved peripheral awareness. Armor's mobility wasn't just about comfort, it determined survival. A fighter who couldn't react quickly, parry a blow, or shift weight effectively would be overwhelmed immediately. Because medieval armor allowed such fluid movement, heavily armored soldiers maintained battlefield dominance for centuries. The gear simply didn't hinder them the way people believe. In many endurance tests, trained individuals wearing accurate reproductions outperform modern soldiers burdened with contemporary gear. Again, it's not because medieval armor was magically lighter, it's because it was designed around the human body, not around a list of theoretical threats. And this is the crucial lesson. Medieval armorers built systems that supported a full range of motion, improved stamina, and protected without limiting the natural mechanics of fighting. It was armor designed for a world where fatigue killed faster than swords, and where mobility wasn't optional. It was everything. Number 5. Why medieval armor excelled in ways modern gear doesn't need to. A lot of the confusion around medieval armor comes from comparing it to modern body armor, which is built for completely different threats. Modern vests are engineered for bullets and explosive fragments, not for axes, spears, or heavy warhammers. Medieval armor, on the other hand, was designed specifically to counter the full range of handheld weapons powered by human strength. When examined within that context, it becomes obvious that medieval armor was extraordinarily effective. A sword slash to a plate breastplate did virtually nothing. Most thrusts slid off due to angled surfaces. Arrows from distance often bounced, and even close-range hits had inconsistent results unless fired from powerful longbows or crossbows at the perfect angle. Maces and warhammers could dent armor and cause blunt trauma, but even then, armor prevented penetration, which was the difference between surviving a blow and being immediately incapacitated. Plate armor turned many lethal strikes into tolerable impacts. This allowed knights to continue fighting after receiving several hits that would have easily killed lightly protected opponents. The adaptability of medieval armor is another feature modern equipment lacks. Battlefield conditions changed quickly from century to century. When longbows became dominant, English armorers improved helmet shapes and increased chest curvature. When polearms became common, shoulder, elbow, and knee reinforcement improved. When cavalry charges became heavier, leg armor evolved. Armor wasn't static, it was in constant conversation with the battlefield, adjusting to reflect the realities of warfare. A modern soldier receives gear issued from a standardized system. But medieval armor was tailored like a suit. Every plate was shaped to fit the individual wearer's body. This customization meant better weight balance, smoother movement, and closer fitting plates that did not shift during combat. A knight's armor improved with age as he understood which areas needed reinforcement or better padding. This sort of personalized engineering has no modern equivalent except in elite military units or specialized sports equipment. Durability is another overlooked advantage. Modern ballistic plates are designed to stop a few impacts at most. After that, their structural integrity drops dramatically. Medieval armor could handle dozens, even hundreds of strikes in one battle. A dented plate remained functional. A dented ballistic plate becomes a liability. And because medieval weapons relied on impact rather than chemical propulsion, armor rarely catastrophically failed unless struck repeatedly at weak points. Coverage also set medieval armor apart. Today's soldiers typically protect only the torso and head, leaving arms and legs vulnerable because the modern battlefield prioritizes speed, long-range engagement, and keeping weight low. In contrast, medieval warfare required complete protection. A cut to the leg could end a career. A broken finger could mean dropping a sword and immediate death. Armorers therefore created gauntlets, greaves, arm harnesses, gorgets, and sabatons, forming a nearly full-body protection system without compromising mobility. This leads to the most important point. Medieval armor was perfectly matched to its environment. It didn't need to stop bullets. It didn't need to withstand explosive fragmentation. It only needed to counter the weapons of its time, and in that role, it was nearly unbeatable. English knights routinely survived encounters that would have been fatal to unarmored opponents. Even when defeated, they often died from exhaustion, drowning in mud, or being overwhelmed by multiple attackers, not from direct penetration of their armor. If you placed a modern soldier wearing Kevlar on a medieval battlefield, he would be torn apart by axes, poleaxes, and swords within seconds. Kevlar cannot stop heavy chopping or crushing weapons. Modern helmets crack under focused blows. The lighter padding is instantly compromised by steel-edged weapons. Modern armor isn't ineffective, it is effective for its world. But that world is nothing like the Middle Ages. This is why medieval armor deserves respect. It wasn't obsolete technology. It was peak personal protection built for a specific kind of warfare. It evolved from real combat experience, constant adaptation, and a deep understanding of how human bodies move and how human-powered weapons behave. In many ways, medieval armor wasn't just protection. It was a battlefield survival system unmatched in its own era, and surprisingly advanced even by today's standards.